Hey everybody, I hope you are doing okay. There's Paul here, and I've got my mate Kevin with me. So without further ado, here he is, the man, the myth, the legend, out there in sunny California. He's What's going on, mate? How are you doing?
That's my enthusiastic Wednesday life. Actually, it's been beautifully sunny out recently. I know you guys get some weather down there too. It's nice, but no, we're blessed and fortunate, and continuing our days. As Shane's just started doing virtual soccer training twice a week because he's a big soccer fan. I know you're huge on that yourself, but Shane's got some skills, and so they've been doing this thing where they sort of set up a Zoom meeting, and he does it through his phone on our front lawn, and the coach runs them through all these things. So that's been fantastic.
That's good. And it's kind of a big day today. We'll talk about all of our stuff in a little while, but actually today is the first New Comics Day in a long time, which I think is pretty encouraging for a lot of people. So I've seen a few people get really excited about it. I think it's amazing that we're back to that point, because I think the industry's really been struggling. So hopefully this is the beginning of good stuff,
Yep. No, that was, when I heard that, that when DC made when Diamond made the announcement a couple of weeks ago that May 20th was going to be the official, back in business. I have seen, I follow a couple comic stores. Of course, my good friends up at Jetpack Comics up in New Hampshire, as well as Ryan Leibowitz, who runs Golden Apple Comics up in LA and stuff. So we've been trying to help and support and keep tuned in with them. So fingers crossed that curbside pickup and.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I've obviously, we have so many friends in the comic book business, and so many, we're very hopeful for the way it goes for the retailers. So hopefully this is the beginning of a new kind of normal. I hope everybody out there is staying safe. Obviously, it's really difficult right now, and people are struggling to work out what to do. Since we're going to just chat for a minute, tell us what's kind of like the way that they're reintroducing like COVID and all this stuff out there. Like, how are they dealing with it right there? Is it all masks all the time? Is it shelter in place? What's the deal out there?
Well, just from, because we're still, even though, California in general is sort of reopening like a lot of places very carefully and with a separate time, but it is, masks pretty much anywhere and everywhere you can go. It's just, it's some places, a lot of stores, grocery stores, and a lot of places like that won't let you even into the store without a mask on, which is generally good. But, there is still sort of those blurred lines between walking outside with a mask or without a mask if you're walking your dog, that kind of thing. Some people think in our neighborhood you should wear one all the time, and some people, well, we don't. We think it's still a lot more is being made of it than it really is, and so they're being a little bit more skeptical, not being as careful. But we'll sort of take it, try not to get angry. We've all been inside for the same amount of time, and we miss our time outside with our friends and our family.
Yeah, so I'm in Georgia, and as you know, Georgia's got a different way of doing things. Georgia's just like, I went to the store today to get something, and maybe 20% of the people in the store had a mask on. 80% of them didn't. Like, it's really different here. So, there's a lot of different thoughts about it. You and I are not here to talk about COVID particularly. It's just kind of interesting to find out how things are in your part of the world. I want to say hi to Mahir Jasneet, who's a great regular, Stephen, Gabriel, Scrat. Well done, by the way, Scrat. You're scoring points with us already because you literally posted something about my wife. So I'm gonna talk about my wife in a second, because that's my only thing. Is she's been working really hard, Kevin. As you know, my nigh perfect wife has been she's awesome, and this week we spent 3 hours dropping off little presents for her kids that she teaches in her class, because she wanted them to feel special. And so she's been teaching remotely. She's been reading them every day. And so we drove around and she dropped off little presentation packages, and they got to open them online, and they got candy in it, and they got like a little award that says like, well done, or something like that. So my wife is awesome. That being said, she's also loopy, which is why she's nigh perfect and not perfect. So amongst her accomplishments this week was last night she tried to fix a faucet and it didn't work so well, so she flooded through the ceiling and down into my office, which is why.
Well, I've been one of those guys lucky enough to meet your wife and the whole rest of your family, and she's adorable. And the first thing I do is congratulate her for the tolerance of you, and I do the same with my one. No, but that's great. I think that's wonderful she did that, because it's a thing. See so many students right now going through graduation, which is whether it's a drive-by parade where they go, or people going in front of their favorite teacher's house and just sort of going by with a sign saying "love you," and it's hard because this was Shane's graduating from 8th grade and he's going to be a freshman in high school, so this was a big, every year is a big year, but this was a big year for him, this transition, and it was so we feel for all the people that did graduate that couldn't experience those moments, not only to say goodbye, and Shane did. God bless him. He's just so great. A lot of his students, they write all the teachers and they say thank you, and that's
yeah. Teachers are amazing. My wife is amazing. And everybody here is amazing. Thanks very much for showing up, Anthony and Toka and Shaman. Yes, it's a tap, Shaman, not a faucet, but I'm just saying it, like the way that I expect you people to understand it. My wife does this all the time. She has these loopy behaviors, and one of them is that she likes to start doing a job, and then she calls me over and says, every single time she says the same thing, some of the pieces are missing. Some of the pieces are missing. I'm like, babe, did you start from the beginning and follow the instructions? She's like, well, how hard could it be? And now, of course, the room is flooded. And so, yeah, my house had a little bit of rework done this week. She's brilliant. So this week, you and I are going to be talking in a way. I want to kind of like qualify this to everybody. Kevin and I decided that we are going to talk about Tundra Publishing, and we're going to do that like next time that we do something. We're going to take a break in the next couple of weeks, I think, because Kevin has some other stuff that's sort of prearranged. But at some point, we're going to talk about the big thing of Tundra Publishing, because it's never been spoken about. Nobody knows what the story is, and you and I understandably know the entire story of what happened at Tundra, so that's going to be super interesting. But to qualify what Kevin and I are going to be talking about tonight, there's a real dark side to the entertainment industry, but it's not like Kevin and I are here to literally just name names, okay? We're not going to do that. We're not about naming names and being mean to people and telling like how frustrated we are. And there's Gib over there. Gib's like the Big Numbers 3 story. Gib, we will tell the Big Numbers 3 story because it is an interesting story, along with Big Numbers 4. We'll tell that next time when we do the Tundra thing. But this time, you and I, Kev, are going to talk a little bit about some of the difficult stuff that's in our business, right? And I figured a nice light way to sort of get into talking about that stuff is to talk about like what people's perception is of our job and what our job actually is, because it's much different from what I think people might assume, right? So here's a good one to start with. Like, how many hours do you get drawing or writing in a week compared to hours of bullshit? What's your ratio of actual creating stuff to actual bullshit?
It's funny. I tell this story. It's told it for many, many years in the transition of what Peter and I were doing for a living, say in 84, 85, 86, to a good part of 1987, before it transitioned into the release of the Ninja Turtles in late 87, and then the cartoon in very late 87, and 1988. And it's with them, and I always want to tee it up that it's not a complaint in any sense of the word. It's one of those things that's like when we went into this, we definitely had no idea what to expect, and this is going to be a great sort of segue when we get into some of the things of those pitch meetings and the stuff that we went into in Hollywood, in years to come, immediate and in years to come. But so we didn't have anything, know what to expect, but we went into it with the knowledge that how lucky we were in meaning that touched on this before, is that our heroes that we stand on the shoulders of, the giants that didn't get to have that kind of control or say over the characters and the creations. And we've, as fans, you and I and a lot of fans watching have sat through some really terrible Marvel movies and or DC movies long before the Marvel Cinematic Universe sort of started getting things right and that kind of thing. And so we've seen things that can go array and go that spinning off into an unpleasant universe so quickly. And so when we started, we wanted to make sure we had say over everything. So we then went from say a good chunk of 1987, for example, still drawing and writing 90% of the time and dealing with the business aspects about 10% of the time. And by 1988, it was almost an immediate switch to 90% of the time dealing with the business aspects of our creation and 10% of the time doing the physical creative work on the comic books and those kind of things. We're still doing creative work as far as it was working on the animated TV shows and so many other, the coloring books and just different stuff that was coming through that we wanted approval over to get right. But it was a pretty immediate switch, and that progressed through, a number of years of that. Which, again, not a complaint. We were running our universe, and we were working very hard at managing our characters and making sure they were represented the way we wanted to. We didn't get to do as much hands-on creative work that we did, and then it's probably a good segue into the next conversation on Tundra, where I can go like around the time where I could have sort of balanced the schedule and started going back to more regular drawing. I did this nutty thing where I started a Words and Pictures comic book museum. I bought Heavy Metal magazine, and I started Tundra Publishing, which took me straight off the drawing table and right into this other world, which I thought I knew better than I did. But no, it was a complete role reversal.
The interesting part of Tundra, and we'll get into this again when we talk about it, it wasn't really just one company. It was about 6 companies, because there was one in the UK, there was a pre-production house, there was, all kinds of other peripheral companies that were tied into it. So there was a lot to manage, man. There was a ton going on. But, how about now? Like, how much work are you getting done in a week compared to bullshit?
Well, I was lucky in that I had this thing that probably around 2010, 2011, I literally had gotten so not misguided. I was just frustrated with Hollywood and trying to evolve to ideas where, say, I thought I'd like to direct a movie. You've done some directing, you've done screenplays. I thought that there was other ways to express the creativity, because I would always sort of be like, well, comic books are kind of, if you're a writer, artist, they're kind of a simplified director's chair. If I thought I'd like to direct something, I thought there was opportunities for ideas that I had that would be great children's projects or other age groups. And as we segue into later into this discussion, is this meeting after meeting of just nothing being accomplished. So when I finally left Hollywood, and I literally left Hollywood, I did this final series of gallery art shows at Meltdown Comics on Sunset. I just sort of said, I just got to go back to where I started. I need to go back to writing and drawing. And so just dealing with life, and then the artistic writing and drawing stuff was about 50-50 for a good chunk of the time. You balance your days like that. And these days depends, if I can get, like today was a challenging day where I got 2 hours in when I needed 8 hours of creativity. But if I can get 6 hours of literally doors closed in the studio, I'm drawing. That's a very successful day, and it's tough, because I would, back in the old days, if I was drawing, 10 or 12 hours a day, it still wasn't enough. But
I think first of all, we're all dealing with COVID, right? So you have a young son, I have 2 young kids, and they're home, so that's really difficult, right? It reminds me of a story that I heard one time. Orson Welles, just before he died, they asked him the question, do you have any regrets? And his answer was, yeah, I got a lot of regrets. And he said his regrets were that he felt that a person like him should have been working 90% of the time and trying to work 10% of the time. And it was the other way around. He was trying to work 90% of the time. He was trying to get deals done. And only 10% of the time did he ever get to work, right? And I feel that pain. You know, that's part of our lives, right? In terms of the complexity of our jobs, right? It really depends on what kind of creator you are. I know that you, for example, are really big into, like, when you do your art for comics, you're really big into layouts, and that takes a lot of time and preparation. And people don't really understand what even goes into, say, a comic book, right? Like, I happen to be sitting in front of, you know, a book. I got these all over the place. These things, you know, whoops, here we go. I break down every single line of every single comic book, and then I write a treatment, and then I write the comic book. Now, I've heard other people tell me that they just start typing and see what happens. And I couldn't possibly do that. I don't even know how to just type and get going. I need to structure everything. And I know you do a bunch, you know, you're really into layouts before you get into the artwork. Do you get like, this is a good one. Do you get like any health issues, you think, that have come from this, like bad back, bad neck, stuff like that? Because lots of artists do, right?
Yeah, you know, it's like, no, it's just funny because I'm thinking like, you know, certainly at you know, coming up, my birthday's the end of this month, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to be 58, but I'm getting old enough where I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, you can't remember.
You know, it's funny because my adorable wife too, which she'd for a while she'd put 49 as on the birthday cake every time, and then Shane a couple years ago thought it'd be funny to switch it to 94, and he said if you put it at 94, then everybody will think you look really good for your age, which I thought was very clever. But yeah, pretty much, you know, everything hurts at some point. But no, it's funny just going back to your preparation, because it is really fascinating to me when you meet another creator or another artist and talk about how they prepare, and like, you know, just directly related to what I'm working on now, which is this series called The Last Ronin, which was based on a story that Pete and I wrote in 1987. Tom Waltz and I have adapted it, so we have broad strokes of what the story is going to be, but I'm doing two things. Like, I'm doing the layout. Oh, is that a he or she? I forgot.
This is he. This is Claudius, and he's decided to come in and just make it his own. You know, it's like a big baby.
We have a cat, and the boy cat is named Callie, but he's both the cats, we changed their names to bad kitties. They're just bad kitties. They're actually good kitties, but they're actually bad. But because it's the setting is slightly in the future, and there's certainly, so to provide the artist with what I'm doing or where the story is taking place, like Tom and I have talked about the idea, and then as I do the layouts, we adjust the script to fit sort of some of the movements page to page. But then if I'm describing a certain scene set in a certain location, Andy has no idea what that location looks like. So then I'll do the drawings of that location to sort of give him a guideline of what it's fun. It's a process, but it's challenging, it's brain racking, and it's just incredibly rewarding when you get it right. But dude, it's like, you know, I know you've done this. It's like you wake up at 2 a.m, or you haven't gone to bed yet, and you haven't solved something, or you wake up at 2 a.m. and you solve something in your head, and you can't go back to sleep until you get up and you address that on your table. So then suddenly it's 4 a.m. You know, the rest of the family's getting up in 2 hours, and you've got to like. So it's I think sleep deprived, probably having a few too many glasses of wine at night sometimes. Depending how late your night's going to go. Otherwise, you don't have anything. You just drink green tea or coffee. And then, yeah, it's you know, the gym is always the first thing to go out the door, and certainly in the experience, the world we're living in now, that it's hard to even get that kind of physical activity, which we know.
I've been biking, by the way. I did another 20 miles today. I'm like really into biking now. It's killing me, but I'm loving it. But it's like,
no, you have to, because it's like, you know, and it's one of those things that I once did this lecture down at the Cubert School, and a couple of the guys that I met there, artists and instructors, one of the guys that was an instructor had really put this important program together for a lot of the QBs at the time, which was just stopping at some point and just stretching and getting activity, going for a 10-minute walk will change your life. You know, it's like it blows out the cobwebs. It's like you got to get out and you got to sort of stretch that back and feel, you know, just think about anything than what that page in front of you that you know is already late. You're already going to get yelled at, and you're already going to need to do revisions, but you just got to sort of set it down and you know, if you work later, but take out.
Sorry, by the way, I was a bit distracted because this stupid idiot keeps climbing behind my computer and trying to mess with the wires because he wants some cat treats. So I'm just ejecting him from the room right now. He's really stupid. Go away. All right, he'll come back in about 2 seconds. You know, I think this is actually pretty interesting to talk about. I didn't plan on talking about this, but you know how our conversations go. This might be really nice to explain to some of the people out there. How do we make comics, right? So I'm going to start. First question, where do ideas come from? Damn, I don't know, man. They come from all kinds of places, but, you know, it's probably from living life. And so me personally, I start with a blank piece of paper as the writer, you know, and Kevin, you're a writer too, so you do the same thing. And what I tend to do is I do this thing, I'll get to that, which is a sort of a page by page breakdown of what I'm going to write. And then I break down my page by page breakdowns into these things, which are panel by panel layouts, right? I lay them all out, I write out the script, and to me, my scripts tend to be maybe, you know, 6,000 to 8,000 words long. And then we get it to the artist, right? So now imagine that I write a script for you, right? You get my script and now you've got to break that story down. Now tell everybody like what it is that you would do with it.
Well, actually, you know, what's funny, I'm just going to flip it back to you for a second and go, when you write your scripts, do you do, you know, page to page, panel to panel, you know, descriptive caption, dialogue? So when you're sending a script and it's fully, boom, it's basically, it's pretty tight overall, that the story you want to tell.
Yeah, and I've got a very specific thing that I like to do with artists. So I say to them, look, here's where I look at it. If you want to add a panel, so if I write a full page script and it says there are 4 panels and you want it to be 5, go ahead, because adding a panel probably helps you, the artist, to tell the sequence, right? However, if you want to combine 2 panels into one, please call me because I wrote those panels for a reason. And that's pretty much it. So I'm fine with how, you know, artists can take my scripts. And by the way, anyone out here who is watching, I am always happy to send any of you a script. So if you would like to contact me on Facebook, please send me a message and I will happily send you a script so that you can see it. So Scrat, I see that you're writing your first comic, which is awesome. I will happily show you how scripts are written, but remember, it's how I write comic book scripts, and different people have different methods. Now, what Kevin's talking about a little bit is some people will write just an idea. So they'll just give you a page, right, Kevin, and go, on this page, this is what happens. They leave it to the artist to do, and then they dialogue it afterwards. That's called Marvel style, and I have no idea how that works. I can't imagine writing a story like that, but, you know. Anyway, so carry on, man. So you get my script and it's a full script, and now you have to break it down, right?
Yeah, no, that's what I like is why I was asking, because that's what I thought. And what's fascinating is and working with Tom Waltz, who's probably the, you know, the most you know, traditional method writer that I met, in the sense that he does exactly what you do. He sort of has, you know, what's the idea? Because we'll sort of beat around a premise. It'll be like, say, myself and Bobby Kurnow, series editor at IDW, and Tom, and then we'll collect our notes from Nickelodeon, who has, you know, approval and input and all these things, and so eventually, so we'll come up with about a page and a half of a treatment, a full story summary. Then Tom goes in and he does a full script. He does it, you know, detail to detail, panel to panel, page to page. And then, which is fantastic. I love reading his full scripts, and then he passes it off to guys, you know, Dave Walkner or Corey Smith, and they pretty much adapted, pretty straightforward. And I think when they do have an idea or a suggestion, like you said, if they want to change a panel or adjust it, and Tom was pretty good at it, because we were working with a number of the same artists repeatedly, Michael Delanis and guys that sort of, so Tom would know his strengths. He would go like, hey, Michael, we need over this 2-page spread, I need this, this, and this covered and accomplished in the layout, so you can break the design of that spread down, but this is what I need to sort of go through and be accomplished by the end of the spread, which is great. And I love it because I get this complete visual picture in my mind when I read some of the scripts. For me, what Tom and I have been doing, which is very interesting, is that it's really sort of an ebb and flow where we sort of go back to a version of what Pete and I used to do, in the sense that Tom and I will talk about the ideas, and even like on issue 1 of The Last Ronin, which is the first issue we're really doing this very intimately on, is the whole issue has been broken down almost like roughly what we want to cover on each page. And Tom will go in and he'll do more specific, his traditional style scripts for pages, say 1 through 10, which will cover this kind of scene, and then there'll be like this 20-page segment in the end, so, in the middle, which is what we're doing on Last Run, and is that it's a big action set piece. We know we have to hit certain beats, but he and I we do it almost more Marvel style. I'll do the layouts, and then he'll go back in and dialogue, but it is that transition that it's an interesting sort of organic ebb and flow, where to me it always was, when I would write, and I use the term loosely, it's like, to me, in a perfect world, having a story that has no dialogue at all is the perfect story to me.
Yep.
I feel like
I agree with you, because listen, I'm a writer, and I learned a long time ago to try to avoid putting too much dialogue on the page. But then again, there are plenty of times where we need to be careful and realize that the actual action and the most exciting thing that's going on right now is what's being said. Like sometimes it's not really the visual that's carrying it. It's actually what's being said and the things that are happening. But such things as pacing, timing, there are techniques in comic book storytelling that are not available in any other form of storytelling. Because here's the one thing by the way, I'm going to do a timeout. I have no idea how we got onto this, because we weren't going to talk about this tonight, but this is awesome. Right? So we're going to talk about this. Right? We'll get onto the dark stuff in a while. We're being very positive right now. So, we're looking at pacing. So here's a good example, right? I may want to pace a page, and I may want at the very bottom of the page for 3 panels to be put one next to each other, where you show the exact same image in each panel. And then in the final panel, maybe one of the characters kind of turns to the other one and says, "You're an idiot." And you're like, that's a good piece of comedy, but it only works with the first 2 panels in front of it. You're talking about like pacing and a little bit of a moment for that joke to hit. And if you just did it with only the joke, it wouldn't work. So you have to work out how to pace it, how to time it. I wanted to share a moment here. I wanted to share something that people can sort of take a look at here. This is a page of scripting. This is how I write scripts. It may not be how anybody else would write scripts, but Sin had asked the question, how do they look, right? Well, these are my panel descriptions. That's a pretty big one. And as you know, I used to be Alan Moore's editor. And I've changed a lot, right? I've changed a lot. But this is the first issue of the Inhuman series. This is the very first panel description. And so really what's relevant is this stuff that I'm highlighting. That's the dialogue that's in the panel. And then this giant piece of stuff up here is, to me, a letter that I send to the artist. And I say, "Hey, artist, here's the best idea that I can give you, but I'm not going to give him camera angles except on rare occasions." There are other times when a panel description can be really light. Obviously, if you look down, there are way smaller panel descriptions here. And this is what became the Inhumans, which, people are relatively familiar with. So I've worked out it's 3 panels. And, here's the way that the script kind of continues. And to me, I'm trying to write a really friendly letter to the artist and say, I'm trying to spark the best ideas I can in you. But at a certain point, I've abandoned it now. Like, I never abandoned the work because I'm available on the phone, and I'm one of the few writers, apparently, who says to the artist, okay, what do you want to do? Because a lot of writers won't even do that with an artist. They'll just send a script in and then they're finished with it. Me, I want, and you and I have worked together on some other stuff anyway, Kevin, but what I want to do, I want to send this to you and have you call me and say, okay, I get what you're saying, but let's take a look at this and fix it, or let's get some other ideas in it. Or even before I even write it, I want to hear what you want to draw. Because if you hate drawing, I've got an artist that I think is a brilliant artist that I know, and he told me, please don't put vehicles in it because it will make me miserable. and if I'm having to draw vehicles all over the place, so is there any way we can do the same story without vehicles? And my answer to that is absolutely, man. I don't want to mess up your week. To Jay Lee, sorry, one last thing, which is an inside joke to Jay Lee, who is notorious for not doing any backgrounds. I put in on one of my first scripts to him, I put in, okay, so in the background, there's a load of horses running, and they're being ridden by giant hands. Because artists hate drawing hands and they hate drawing horses. So I told him there was this giant thing, and it was a kind of metaphysical thing. And he called me up immediately. He's like, what the hell is this thing? And I said, it's a practical joke, Jay. Don't worry about it.
No, I love it. And what's interesting is like, it's like, because I think it, as flexible as you can be and you want to be in your stuff, but I know that it's like there is some specificity in sort of is capturing those moments. And if you get a shorthand with an artist like you work with Jay Lee and some of the guys that you work with, it's wonderful because you can like that little the large chunk of exposition that you are teeing up for the artist to me is important because I still will do that. It's like how I talk sometimes. I talk way too much, but I'll still sort of set out just like a paragraph of sort of what I see. And then because I can visualize it, especially when I'm working with somebody that can draw, have characters emote better and pull off some of the acting stuff and suit these specific moments that we need to hit. It's like I'll still do the layouts, but then I'll do the scene and sort of visual scene. So they've got the sort of the description, but even though, I might be thinking of say, how Ridley Scott might stage a futuristic set, and they might be thinking about how Roger Corman might stage a futuristic set, and they're worlds apart. So you still want to get them into the, mind melt with them in the same headspace. And it's funny, I have a couple quick anecdotes, which is interesting because I feel like when I do stories, when Tom and I do stories, and I've done a lot of stories for IDW, and I found this out, and it was such a surprising thing. It's like when I worked with DC, but in IDW Comics, they don't do any advertisements in the stories. So page one, and then your left, right, left, right, left, right, your page turns are all spot on. They lead right into the next page without any kinds of advertising. And I'd completely forgotten about this, and it made me think of you just as we were talking about, as you're saying this now, because when we did the Commandy story, I worked with Freddie Williams, who I adored his skill and his talent. We were sort of paced up this thing. And so I was very adamant of, well, if we leave this panel as, again, what you're thinking on, lower right hand, it's going to lead into what's going on to, left, right on the next two pages. Yep. But you flip the page and there's like a hostess ad and you go like, and just threw everything off. And I completely forgot about it. So when you did, Tom King had written the script that we adapted for Commanding issue 9 and the Commanding Challenge. And so when I got the issue and it was like all the page breaks were wrong. Everything was just like, I just went, oh, poop. It's like the moments you would, work so hard to get those.
It's amazing.
Anyway, so that's it. It's fun to sort of figure that out. What's that?
Yeah. Like I mean, I think the thing is, people would get a lot of help out of, right? Because you're working on a project right now. I think you have one that's coming up. You're always working on comics. I'm actually surprisingly working on more comics than I normally do right now, and I'm working on a form of digital storytelling. So I've been a big grumpy bastard about how digital comics work. I've been really grumpy about it over the years because I tend to be more of like a futurist. And so I tend to say to people, look, I don't want to see a comic just appear on a screen. I want to be able to touch it if it's digital. I want to be able to move something with it, not motion comics, which tend to be really bad. I want to be able to interact with it so that it tells the story better, right? And so, you know, there's loads of ways in which you can do that. But just for most basic comic book sort of description, I give you a script and then it's a full script. Generally, I say, hey, man, if this has got 4 panels on it, if you want to make it 5, go for it. Because, you know, but I've always believed that I'm the writer and co-director. If you're the artist, you're the DP and co-director with me, and we're directing this little movie in 20 pages, right? And so I give you,
yeah, you need to.
I give you, I just want to make an aside. Hey, Craig, thanks very much for texting me and telling me, look, I look like a scruffy goat. That's one of my Crystal Palace mates who just texted me to tell me you look like a scruffy goat. Thanks, Craig. Anyway.
Actually, no, just to go back for a second, you saw Kino Dude?
Yeah.
Kino Dude, who was just posted just before. That's Ernie Reyes Jr.
Oh, Ernie. All right, man. Excellent.
Yeah, Ernie and I, and we did a Facebook Live event last Friday with we watched TMNT with me movie 2, and so Ernie joined and stayed for the whole session, and it was just one of those things that, you know, I've been lucky enough to keep in touch with Ernie over the years. He's the most lovely and adorable person. His family is awesome, so we had such a great time. So it was great to see Kino. So thanks, hey Kino, thanks Ernie.
All right, Ernie. Not really Ernie.
Sorry, I don't think you look that.
Kino. All right.
Well, you don't look that scruffy. You look like an older version of Vivian from the Young Ones. That's all I can think.
Okay. So going back to comics, right? It's how you create them. You get my script. Now you got to break it down and tell us your process. Because you got to break it down and then you got to like pencil it, right? And what process do you go through to try to work out like how to make panels big and all that kind of stuff? Like what, you know, how do you do that?
It's very tricky because you know, it's funny is the first couple of times I had conversations with and worked with Freddie Williams, who's quite a gifted and talented artist, and he would be like, and he's also, it's like he's one of these guys. We have the same birthday, May 30th, and so he's, even when he was growing up, and he was a huge fan of the Turtles, and he always knew we'd be friends. We are friends. I love the guy to death, and his wife Kiki, and so he would always come in and go like, I love your nuance here, and I love how you did this there, and I like how you did this specific thing there. And I go, dude, half the time I don't know what the hell I'm doing. It's just sort of like, and he goes, and he would look at me like in this look of horror, like, no, you carefully plotted this out. I know. I said, no, guys like Jack Kirby and people like that, those guys had the shit down. They could figure it out. But for me, it was sort of like, it's just a feeling you go on. It's like when you're writing one of your scripts and I'm adapting something or writing some of my own, it's sort of like, you feel the moments that this one needs to be a little bit bigger because I want to express this moment in a more important way, or this thing needs to be, I need you to do that, like you described earlier, like, you know, same panel, head turn panel, because you need those 3 beats in a moment to make that work. And so it's almost like the story sometimes tells you, and so you sort of ebb into it that way, and then we always think about the page turns and stuff. So
that is right, man. I want to point something out because I think this is a really interesting thing. I bet you this has happened to you, right? So for me, I'm really meticulous. Like I've laid everything out. I know exactly what I'm going to write, and I start writing it. But then there's a second half of this, which I think comes from confidence. And confidence is always equal to accomplishment. So if you're confident in what you do, you're probably going to do better. Now, I know that Sarah from Meta and Stogie, who are in tonight, will probably roll in their eyes right now because I'm about to give you a piece of my college lecture, but fuck it, here it goes. when you see somebody, I've found a funny analogy, which is a golf analogy, right? If you hand someone a golf club in the middle of a field and let them hit the ball, and they're a halfway decent golfer, they'll hit it fine. And now when you put a green and a flag in front of them and say, do that again, now physically they change because they're less confident, right? So confident, as Sarah knows, confidence equals accomplishment, right? So she knows how to say that, right? So what I've always known is that once I start typing and once I start making, I'm going to have a few things called happy accidents. Stuff is going to happen, and I didn't plan on it happening, but it's probably the best material. And the first time it ever happened to me, I was writing Hellblazer, and I was writing a story that was very much about my little Nan, who you loved, and my granddad Bill. And it was very much about a grandfather of a girlfriend of mine in Great Britain, and he'd been at Dunkirk, and he had half his hand shot off in Dunkirk. He walked in and out for 2 days with the tide, and just as he was about to fall asleep in the sea, because they told him to keep his rifle dry, so he had his rifle above his head. And just as he fell asleep, they picked him out of the water, and they brought him back to Great Britain. So I wrote a story about a guy who was walking in and out with the tide because he could smell his girlfriend's perfume, and he wanted to she was keeping him alive, and she was keeping him sort of ready to go. So he was thinking of her and thinking of her. And the last line I wrote, probably 3 o'clock in the morning, was, so he walked in and out with the tide for 2 days, and she was there with him the whole time, helping him keep his rifle dry. And I kid you not, I'm a big softy, and I started crying. And I had no idea that I would write. I had no idea. I didn't prepare for that line. I didn't know I was going to write that line. And it was the very first time when I finally realized, wait a minute, some of this stuff is making itself. And it's probably from practice, and it's probably from all that kind of stuff. But all of a sudden, I wrote a line, and I said, wow, that's really hit me emotionally. So that stuff comes all the time now. I often find that when we start working, the best stuff happens. So don't over prepare, because guess what? Stuff's going to happen that you didn't think was going to go, right? That's surely the same with an artist.
No, that's the greatest advice ever, and it's so true, because it is like, it's this combination of when you're, certainly when I was younger, you sort of have more happy accidents, and so like you don't know what you're doing, in the sense that you kind of feel it along, and again, it goes back to this point I mentioned a minute ago with Freddie would mention Freddie, because somebody would come up to me at a show, and they would go, that they've read into your work, and they go, the simple, lovely nuance that you put between that moment, between the reflection of these two characters talking together, and then before they transition to the scene, it's just so powerful that you go like, that was.
Yeah, I've had people say about my work. They've said, oh yeah, I can tell that you really were informed by John Milton's Paradise Lost, and it's clearly an analogy for Paradise Lost. And I'm like, fuck no, I don't know, no, but great, thank you very much, I appreciate the compliment, but no, so yeah.
And I love that, what you were saying. I love the idea that you're saying is like, as you evolve as a writer, and you start doing things like getting better at imagining yourself as this character in this certain role, and allows you to write those lines that you're doing. But that starts first with like you talked about before, like putting your brother Richard in one of the comics, or you start going to personal experiences of things that you can find yourself definitely getting into that headspace, so you feel confident and comfortable that you can come up with an emotion, and it is that happy accident of creating emotion that actually has the effect on you, which is going to have the effect on the audience, which is, it's hard, man. And it's like, you do have to, you can model this character is kind of like Jean-Luc Picard meets, Jack Burton meets someone, and it's a mess. It's hard to focus the emotion, and it sort of falls short of what you want to do.
It is. It's difficult to work out the difference between planning for something, right, and how it just comes about anyway. Anthony was asking this question right here, right? How do you distinguish between where you want a character to go and where the character wants to go, right? So in other words, I got all the best plans in the world, right? And then you start working on it and you realize, all right, throw it out the window. So here's what I would say from my perspective. If you're on a film set and you bring your storyboards with you and you look at the set and you realize not going to work today, and you got to be prepared to throw those storyboards away. You got to be prepared to throw any good idea away because it's not as good as the one that's coming with what you make, right? So what they call killing your darlings, right? You got this darling in mind, you really want to do it, you're so in love with it, and you get to actually do it, and you realize at the end, after trying to find a way to make that idea work, you realize the best thing you can do is throw it out, and then the project is starting to work, right? Are you a guy, because I know Jay Lee, by the way, just talking about him, are you a guy that throws away artwork a lot because you finish it? Do you work through the art, or do you finish a page and go, I hate it, and then throw it away?
Well, it's tough because there's two parts to that. The answers in two parts to that is, one is that, in my mind, I envisioned myself as a much more talented and much more skilled artist than I am. So, and so you have to have the impression that sometimes the pictures that I see in my mind and what I actually can physically draw are vastly different. And so sometimes I get frustrated, and some pages are pages and covers are a war that I felt that I have lost, but I'm on deadline, so it has to go off the press anyway. And then other ones that I like, that I feel like I won the war. But what's really weird, it's so weird, and it's not always the case, but sometimes the ones that I feel are the most unsuccessful pieces, I've had people come back and go, holy smokes, that piece was exceptional in every way because of this, this, and this. And you go, and like, what? I hated that piece. I almost threw it out. But
you can't win, man. You can't win.
You can't win. But it is sort of like it's a bit of a war. And I think if you're continually challenging yourselves and looking, and again, I think that going back to this idea of happy accidents, is so you keep challenging yourself that the ones that you're looking to solve a problem and something that turns out pretty good. That's a nice happy accident, especially if you can look at it like, have you gone back and read some of your older stuff and went like, well, I kind of wasn't happy with it when I was doing it at the time, but when I go back and read it now, it actually wasn't as bad as I thought.
Well, there's a thought to this, Kevin. They often say that you never finish a script; you're just prepared to abandon it, right? Like,
yeah.
Because you can't. If I ever felt like I was satisfied with something, I have a way of saying it, which is, if you think that you've arrived creatively, because you hear a lot of people talking about it, like, oh, I've arrived creatively, and I'm like, yes, you have. That's as far as you're ever going to go. You finished. You're never going any further, right? So I'm rarely satisfied with what I make. But then I'm forgiving to myself. So a few years afterwards, or a year afterwards, like when I get a new book out, I rarely read it. I don't look at it for ages because I just don't want to see it. And then maybe I wait about a year or two, and then I'll finally pick up a new book that I've done, and then I'll see what it was that I did. Sometimes you're really proud of things. I can pick a few things from my career that I'm super proud of and say, man, I can't believe I wrote that. That's much more intelligent than I am. And then other times I'll see work that I've done and think, I mean, I always try, but I'll look at it and I'll know that was not successful. I didn't make that work the way I wanted it to work, and you can't win them all. But obviously in comics, we do an awful lot of work. So we get published quite often. And,
I'm sorry. I just when you say this, it reminded me of a story that you'll love. As when we did the opening of Thunder UK, and
how could I forget the British Museum? Yes, I do.
The British Museum, and I should probably save this for Thunder, but it's just because it's on topic of what we're talking about now. Yeah. Is the British Museum? So we were over there. We're doing this big opening of Thunder UK, and we're meeting a lot of these. In some cases, meeting some of these guys for the first time. And that's where I met Alan Grant. And Alan Grant had been working with Bisley for a while, especially on a very successful line, Keith Giffen and stuff on Lobo. And I wish I could do Alan's accent because he's right from the heart of Scotland, and he's got this great deep, rich, like, you know, you can almost barely understand him sort of accent. And he's like, yeah, so how do you like working with Simon? And I went like, and I've been working with Simon for about 6 or 7 months. And I said, it's kind of challenging. And he goes, he doesn't read. And I went, what? And he goes, he doesn't read. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, I send him these scripts for Lobo, and then Simon will call me up to discuss the script. And he said, I can hear the pages rustling and that kind of stuff. And Simon will ask several questions related to the script, and they'll kind of talk it out. And Simon likes to talk. It's usually very late in the evening. And so suddenly, like 2 days, then Simon, over the next 2.5 days, would pencil the script out and send it in for approval and for lettering before he did the final inking. And Alan would call Simon up and go, "What the hell is this? This has got nothing to do with the script that I sent you." And he goes, and he said Simon would go on and defend this idea, like, "Oh, I thought this should have been here, this should have been here, and this didn't quite play out well here." And he would come up with some completely on the spot and completely on the fly, fabricated bullshit story defending his ideas and his changes. And it took 3 or 4 or 5 issues, he said, before Simon would send him stuff that he had to completely rewrite. And he would go, he was just remembering what we talked about on the phone call and penciling it because he did not want to read the script.
Because he didn't
have the script in front of him.
And I will tell you, I'll tell you from the perspective of a writer, you know, I don't draw, but I have a really visual imagination. I can like see the movie. And so one of the things that I have to do, and you can imagine this if people don't do comics, imagine that you write a script and you see it backwards. You know it. You know what it looks like. You're doing the best you can. You are always going to get it back, and it will be looking a little bit different from what you imagine. And you have to accept that as a writer. Like I don't draw. I tend not to, you know, give people like stage directions on art, but sometimes I do if I think it's important. So when it comes back, it's going to look different from what I've got in my mind's eye, except for one artist that I've worked with who basically drew everything that I imagined, which is Ramon Bucks, who drew the Fiction Squad stuff that we did for Fablewood. And I also worked on Civil War Frontlines with him. And he, every time I got a script back from him, I couldn't believe it. It would look exactly the way that I imagined it to look. It's almost like our brain thought the same way. And I didn't think that would be the case. Now, since nominally we're actually talking about the dark side, I will tell you one anecdote from me that is a little bit frustrating. You know, I was working on a mainstream book for a while, and I found myself in with an artist who so didn't care about the work. And it amazed me, right? I was really astonished that this artist just didn't want anything to do with it. And what the artist was doing was drawing stuff that, you know, so if we're working on, this is not the character. So for the sake of argument, we'll say Superman, right? I'm writing a Superman book. I can use that because I've never written Superman. So there you go. I'm writing a Superman book, and we have a story, and there are certain things that are happening. Well, on every page, Superman would show up, and I'm like, I didn't write Superman on that page. This is stupid. And I later found out that he just drew Superman on the page because he wanted to, you know, or draw the character on the page, basically, because he wanted to sell the art at conventions. And he sold it for more than if it had. And I'm like, first of all, I had a big problem with the publisher. It's your book. It's our content. Because in the end, when the pages would come in just before publication, I would have to re-dialogue them at the last second. I would basically have to dialogue them again because this artist had sabotaged them. Hey, listen, pal, if I write you a panel that says, you know, Batman punches the Joker, the last thing I expect you to do is to draw me a page of a kangaroo jumping over a tank. Like, that's not what I wrote, right? It's impossible to work that way. And I find that to be really unfair, because I find that the people buying those comics, they're getting ripped off, man. They're not getting what they pay for. That same artist, by the way, once handed in 19 pages of the book because he didn't count them properly. That's how badly he went to a full script. He so couldn't be bothered that he basically only drew 19 pages, and we had to remind him, well, there's at least 20 pages every issue. So it can be frustrating, you know, but the point is that I know you to be very meticulous about this, and I tend to be as well. So creatively, you know, is there a script that you got or a script that you wrote, especially one that you wrote? Like, what's your favorite thing that you ever did as a comic? That's a good one.
Well, it's tough because it's funny because I'm still lingering on, because I actually, when Alan Grant was explaining this situation, I actually felt bad for him as a writer, because I immediately thought, like, well, how did the script read before? Because Alan Grant's a very talented writer, and
Yeah.
so is Keith Giffen, who I adore, and stuff. But it was just sort of, and you just, because I've, in the same sense that, when I was working with Simon on Body Count, which was around the same time that this kind of stuff was on, a little bit after, I guess. But there was the same thing that I would send Simon. So when I would work with Simon, I would send him not only a script, which I knew he wouldn't read, but that's when I said I would do the layouts for him, and I'd send him. I said, "This is what I need to accomplish on the page." Yeah. But even then, I'd be like, there's one of those pages, and this reflects directly what you're saying. Is like, there's this one page where there's a very important moment, this beat in a story where this thing set off this whole church building being blown up, and then these two detectives who were sort of taking money on the side, and they sort of part of the thing, and so it was this big, huge moment. They sort of walking away as this church is blowing up, and it sets up a very dramatic moment of what happens next. And so when I got the page in from Simon, the panel of the church blowing up was that big, and the whole rest of the page included the two detectives, and one of them had a marionette that was like a little elephant with horns and a little circus helmet on, and a penguin sticking his head in from the side panel. And I went like, and I got this page, and I went like,
yeah,
what the hell is this? And so, of course, we were up against deadlines, so you sort of like, there was no time to redraw, so you just sort of let the page go through, and you go, but I had to re-dialogue it to go, you took this amazing moment of intensity, this big thing you set up for 4 pages before, and it plays out, for 3 pages afterwards, and you've got a detective holding a marionette of an elephant and a penguin. So
I've had it recently. I had a book. Thankfully, it's not on schedule, so we could fix it. And my return to get the artwork back was fix every fucking page. It's the worst art I've ever seen, the worst storytelling I've ever seen from a book that I've ever written. And I was genuinely offended, and went, look, I'm going to stand up for the work, not for me. I could care less, right? But let's go fight for the work here. Here's an example.
Because it's like,
go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was just, siding, coming into, like, that's, at the end of the day, that's your story and your idea, and you have come up with, the importance of the moment as you are directing it, especially if you're working with an artist that you're not intimately, connecting with and talking about and pacing it out together, but you're directing it to the point where, they've taken your, epic tale of, medieval crisis and blah 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 blah, and made it into like a episode of T.J. Hooker, and you're going like, no. This is,
well, to give people out there a sense of like how this kind of thing would work, right? So the artist that I was recently working with, their instincts were completely wrong in every decision that they made. So here's an example, right? When you've got 2 people in a room and they're talking, and a third person arrives on the scene, right? So it's pretty simple. 2 people are talking. Let's say it's 2 detectives, right? They're talking. Now, person number 3 arrives and says, hey, I just discovered some new evidence, right? When the camera goes onto that person, you need a wide shot, right? Because you need to see that they are arriving at the scene. In other words, you need to see them walking in, and maybe the other 2 people there, and you need to know. So this guy kept doing all of the new arrivals as a close-up because he felt really comfortable with close-ups. But it's like, yeah, but I don't know where that person came from. I don't even know who they are. All of a sudden they're talking, but we didn't establish that they're arriving. So when you get that, it can sound like really weird or esoteric or kind of pissy on our part, where we say, no, wait a minute, there are certain established things that you do. You need a wide shot for when somebody arrives, because if you do it as a close-up, I will never know who that is, right? And so it's very, very difficult for us to and then we have to go back and say, I need you to redraw it. Here's another one that I'm really amazed at, Kev. The very first person I worked with was so when I did Hellblazer, right? Sean Phillips was the artist on Hellblazer, and the first thing that Sean would do would take my full scripts, lay them out like you're talking about, and then draw a little word balloon to know where the real estate was, where the space was for the speaking, and then he knew how to draw the space, right? I would have thought that every comic book artist in creation would do that. And in fact, maybe 50% of artists do that. And then the problem becomes, well, where do we put the word balloons? And you know, if you put them in the wrong place, colors that look beautiful, and then you take the lettering and you move it into the wrong place, and you can't read it, and it's frustrating. So, you know,
no, it's brutal. It's like you just, because you have to have a certain level of dialogue that you have, this and this has to be explained on this page to make this page or the page after and the page after work. If they don't leave any room, then suddenly you have to choose covering up artwork. Certainly, I mean, it was a little bit different in the old days where they would pencil it and then letter it and then go back to inking it. So there was some room to do it. Sometimes that the penciler and ink would be different people. So there was some flex there. But these days, if I've seen that, like, even in working a couple different artists. I mean, Simon again. I'm not going to sound like I'm picking on him in any sense of the word, but but I would sort of lay something out, and you'd have this beautifully rendered panel, and there was just no room for the dialogue.
Yeah. I'm very meticulous about how I work, and so I kind of want to share another thing with you for a second. This is actually this is to do with a film script, right? So here's a screenplay for a project that we have. I'm not going to show too much of it, but here you go, world premiere it. So when you see all of this is how, this is how they appear, right? This is a screenplay, and they are paced a certain way, and I take a lot of time to pace them, right? But what I think is like really important to show people is all of the work that goes into creating that before it's even written. Here is the pacing breakdown that I do of that work, right? Now, if you can see it, I've already written the screenplay before I've written the screenplay, if you see what I mean. Like I've got a minute's worth of stuff in there that I've already written before I even write it. And that's the difficult part is, we're trying to build a film. So this document, you see this crazy document right here? This thing is all the work that I do before I even type a page of a screenplay. So when you're putting that amount of work into it, it can be a bit frustrating when someone else takes all of that work and doesn't do the minimum. It can be frustrating in this business.
Well, that's a great segue into some of the Hollywood stuff, because I love it in that because transitioning from the work you did in comics, and we both started that, and so as you transition into working in Hollywood and finding out things like as you're staging a script, you have to do what you've just shown before you can write the script, because now you're talking about not pages, but you're talking about minutes, and it's like down to the point, like those minutes are, I guess, like, sort of, they kind of still base, it's a page a minute kind of thing. Is that just sort of just a very loose guideline as you sort of
it's a page a minute, right? I fit everything that's on that little pacing breakdown. If it's minute 1, that's what my first page is, and if it's minute 2, that's what my second page is, so that I know in advance of doing it, I'm expecting to do a 102-minute piece, because I've got 102 minutes broken down, because I pace it that way. I'm super meticulous about it because I want it to work a certain way, and I like to see films that have really good pacing. Like one of my like holy grail kind of films actually is the movie Seven, because I love the way it was paced, and it looks brilliant and all of that kind of stuff, but the pacing of it was so great, and there were certain things that they did that made you feel a certain way, and it was all to do with pacing. When I got to understand film pacing and film work, I began to look at how movies were paced and what was it that they did, and the fact is, 20 to 25 minutes in is the end of Act 1. That's what happens. If you don't like it, don't make movies, because that's the end of the first act. And you need at that point to have set up the audience so that they're going to follow these characters for the rest of the time of the movie. And so it amazes me when I see people that don't give a flying rat's ass about this stuff, and they throw the stuff out there. It can be comics, it can be film, it can be video games, which I work in. For those of us, I can count you because I've seen you work, who actually care about our craft. It can definitely get exhausting when you're watching people who do not care about the craft and they are pushing out content. Because what we want to do is to improve the craft. I know that you are built towards directing. I know that you and I were involved in a couple of projects for heavy metal and this stuff that you were building out. I'll tell you this, I think comic book people are the best directors, people that get training in comics, because we take frozen moments in time and we juxtapose them against each other. You're taking out most of the story and you're putting these big stories into tiny little books, right? So for us, the freedom to make a movie is incredible. So, don't sell yourself short, man. You, like most comic book people, who would be a great director, because the freedom of making a movie is so much more than the freedom of making a comic, right?
Yeah, I think that for me it was the easy out was like comic books are so much easier than dealing with all the challenging people and things you have to deal with in making a movie. But I feel like it's one of those things though too that when you look at like and I'm sure you've got the same. I know I have. It's like sometimes you watch a movie that you look at the amount of tremendous effort and idea and what it took to pull that movie off.
Yeah.
And how it could fail so badly on every single level that that was. And it's like, and I'm not, you can't. I think it's hard to point. You figure out one specific aspect of that movie, whether it be the investor person or the producer people, or actor didn't quite work right, and we've heard a million different stories behind this scenes of like just people that can sabotage a movie for the right reasons and the wrong reasons. But it's like it's pretty. There's so many moving parts. That's why the simplification of being a one guy in the director's chair drawing the pages on my own is super appealing. But I think that if you could go in like here's a great example which I think is fantastic, and it's just one that I know because I saw parts of it firsthand. Was there's a guy named Tim Miller who runs a studio called Blur, and Blur Animation, fantastic. And I worked with them on a couple of things that never came to fruition. But I saw the Deadpool trailer, 7 minutes, 4 minutes of 5 minutes of what they put together, the Deadpool, 4 years before they actually leaked it online, and then suddenly got traction and were able to do it as a movie. But Tim has good director sense. He has a great visual eye. He's a great storyteller. He came on the set and he said, "Look, on set, the first thing he said, look, I'm a first-time director. I've never done a live-action movie, but I've done this and this. But I said, we're going to work together. I have a vision. We're going to work together to make this movie the best that it can be, and that's all we could hope for." And to me, that first Deadpool movie was one of the most successful R-rated movies up to that point.
It was hilarious, and it had that spirit in it. You could show. I've been through this because when I first went to Marvel, they were in such trouble that they basically said, "You can do whatever you want, and we trust you, and we're going to let you do it." Right? After 5 or 6 years, they said, "Okay, now we're not going to do it. We're going to tell you what to do," and that's when the content became bad. But when they actually let creators do it, I know someone, Jeff over at Reach Films here, is suggesting, what do we think about the Snyder cut of Justice League? And I'll tell you from my perspective, I don't follow the fan side of it, but I do think that if that's what Snyder intended and it never got released and it really cut it off creatively at the knees, it's great that they're coming out with that, because they should come out with that kind of thing. So many times, I've had stuff that I had a book that I did for a publisher years ago, and the last book was always supposed to be 35 pages, and it was a mystery, right? Mm-hmm. So we got to writing the last book, and the publisher said, we changed our mind. We kind of want it to be a 22-page book. And I said, no, it doesn't work like that. I don't know how to do this now. And they were adamant. They were like, no, we just want to do it as a 22-pager. And they changed their mind. And it killed it. It killed the end of the story, because you just trying to look at it and go, like, I don't know how to fit all these ideas in, because it was a mystery, right?
Yeah.
So what you and I see that I think a lot of people do not see is the crazy ass decisions that get made behind the scenes that most people do not see. I'm going to go to one. No. We're not going to name names, but I'm going to go to one that you and I are super familiar with, right? So you and I developed a TV show when I was quite young. We developed a TV show, and I had never been involved in anything like that before. You know, I was excited to get my first chance. You were the creator of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I was sort of walking into a pitch session with you. And man, pitch sessions are like literally my least favorite thing in the entire universe, right? But, you know, we walked in to do this pitch session, and we pitched it. And I'll let you tell some of the story, obviously, but you and I pitched it, and mostly it was kind of like you pitching it, because I really was this, you know, I was the younger guy in the room, and I wasn't like, you know, but I had helped you develop the project. So we pitched it, and within a minute, the broadcaster had said, yes, we're doing this. And you and I were like, that's crazy. And I actually remember personally walking out with you and saying, is this normal? Like, that doesn't seem to make, you know, that seems a bit weird, man. They said, yes. You didn't even tell them what the story was. And they said, yes. And you and I later found out that that project was accepted so that they could squash it, right? Now, that's crazy bullshit. They didn't want the creator of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles' next project. They wanted to squash it. So they optioned it, and that basically killed it, because it never came out. And does that make you want to just like punch the walls?
Yeah, no, and it's like I guess it's the frustrating part of Hollywood, or dealing in that level of the entertainment industry, is because, you know, if you come from outside of it, and you've had some success, and I was one of the very lucky that I had some success outside of that, but still within the framework. And so you think like you go in very trusting, because you go, well, I'm here in this meeting because they like this other thing I did, which was a success. So they want to have you part of something that will help make another project or your next project a success, and everybody wins. But it was something that I discovered over time. We all did over time in the first couple of years of pitching stuff, and having, you know, I've left multiple meetings in Hollywood where you pitch an idea, and you know, you just literally have somebody shake your hand and go, we have a deal. We'll be moving forward this project next week. This is the most exciting thing that's come through the studio gates in a long time. We cannot wait to, you know, we want to be in your business. You're the one. We want to be in business with you. And then it just never goes anywhere forward. And it came back to like to something Mark Friedman told Peter and I very early on, when he selected, say, Playmates, for example, as the toy company for the Turtles. He said we have to be very careful in who we look to partner up with, because you know, it would be worth, say, some of the bigger companies, whether it be Mattel or Hasbro or some of the other bigger companies out there, that would option your idea going into a boys action figure line of toys and products, that they would buy it. It was worth it them to give you $100,000 to squash the idea, spend 2 years in development until it just fades away, or it gets ripped off or something, but it doesn't compete with anything else that they're doing. Yeah. And that's more prevalent than more, you know, expansive than I thought. The same with, like, you know, why you can have a couple movies the same theme. Remember, like they had Dante's Peak, and what was the other? Volcano and Dante's Peak come out.
Or what about the one with the same two movies came out where there was like a meteor coming from the sky? There was like the one with Bruce Willis and the other one, and they were both in, you know, Volcano was one of them and Dante's Peak was the other one. Then there were two about meteors.
But yeah,
basically, some of those people exploit the fact that you cannot copyright an idea, which is true. but man, you can steal it, right? And so I know, and I know you know, that we get stuff stolen all the time. I mean, I have had stuff stolen. I have been very careful not to get stuff stolen. I want to bring up this comment from Derek, right? Didn't ABC do this when they bought the rights to Fables, only to develop Once Upon a Time, which they then owned outright? So if you think about the logic behind that, they take Fables, they don't own it all, they develop something just like it, and now because you can't copyright an idea, it fully belongs to them. And it sounds like the kind of thing that you would think, well, nobody could do that, surely. And I'm like, let me tell you something. That is standard practice in this business. That is like literally the way things are done. The only reason that they're going to go with your project is because they want that creator. But if they don't want that creator, and it's a long shot, because even the creator of the Ninja Turtles, right, that bringing you from the outside means that you're outside the business. So Sony are not going to go, yeah, let's work with Kevin Eastman inside on a Sony project, because they want you on the lot and they want you working for Sony so that they own it outright. And it's tough, man, because as you and I both know, and I think that we'll get into a couple of these, pitching stuff is insane. So I'm going to give you a minute to think of a couple of your crazier pitching stories. I'm going to go to one that's become one of my favorite. I actually did it, and my Meta Studios peoples are about to go, they're going to roll their eyes again. I recently did it in my TED Talk. Yes, folks, I did a TED Talk. Sorry, I had to throw that in as my little plug. So I was talking about going to, and I actually made a big joke of it. I was like, I was at a company, I can't tell you who it was, rhymes with Disney, right? So with Disney. And I'm literally sitting with them, and they wanted to talk to me because I've got a background in like new media, so I understand elements of like why game design and story were mixed over in the years, and I understood like elements of like new media, like how virtual and augmented reality storytelling will work. So what they wanted me to come in and do was to talk to them about virtual and augmented reality and what I thought it would be like. I'm not a big fan of virtual reality. I think that that augmented reality is different. It means that we can walk in the world and play our stories out in the world, right? But who wants to sit with a brick on their face like this, right? Like, I don't get virtual. Anyway, so I'm over at Disney, and basically one of them asks me, well, what do you think? And I'm pitching them ideas about how I think the storytelling works. And one of them says, this sounds good, but is there anything you can do with the Shaggy Detective or Herbie the Love Bug? And at that point, like the life drained out of me. Like, what's the point, guys? Like, you're literally telling me you want to see if I can reverse engineer an entire technology to fit Herbie the Love Bug? Fuck off. I don't want to do that. That's the worst idea in the world. And that's unfortunately what we're sometimes dealing with. It's extremely difficult to get a corporation to play ball with stuff that works. It's really hard. And
no, it is. It's
yeah. Go ahead.
Because I know because it's like and I have noticed this like man, it's like it's difficult not to tell stories and not name names because it would be really funny.
I didn't name names.
Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith. No, but it's like Kevin Smith has done a great job when Kevin Smith has done a few things like an evening with Kevin Smith when he talks about talking about his meetings, writing the Superman movie and meeting with Peter Goober, John Peters, one of those guys. Because it's like the unfortunate part of Hollywood, in my experience, it's not always the case, but it's certainly my experience with who I've met. It's been people failing upwards and people that have no creativity at all, and sort of somehow they would have a position at one company, and before they, so they would just never make a decision, and before they were about to get fired, they would sort of go to the next company and say, everything that was a success at this company was because of me. You need me. So then they hired at this company at a higher salary with more power and stuff. And it sort of would keep going to this point where, I was working when I was developing a project with Cumber TriStar. It was basically heavy metal. It was a new version of heavy metal, and it started with they hired an executive who, you go up on the 8th floor of the Sony building in Culver City. There's this, the 8th floor is like, I call it the hall, the floor of vice presidents. Like, as you're walking down the hallways, every single door has a VP in front of it, VP of this, VP of that. And so we meet this guy, and we're introduced like, this is the guy. He's into all the same stuff you're into. He's going to point your production all the way through, and he's going to be great. So we're just developing the idea for the second heavy metal movie, which ended up being a disaster anyway. But so, long story short, so I took this guy. I said, let's go out for lunch. Let's go through everything that I want to do with this movie. And so we met for lunch, and I said, well, we've seen what they've done. We all know what Ivan Reitman did so well with the first heavy metal movie. We've seen evolution in animation with what they've done with Akira and Tokyo Wicked City, and this new emergence of Japanese anime. We want to be this, and this, but not quite that. And we want to sort of take it to this level. And I just see the look on this guy's face, and he's just sort of like completely glazed over. Like I go, you've seen Akira, right? And he goes, not yet. It's on my watch list. And I said, well, do you know who? Do you know this director? Do you know this director? Have you seen any of this stuff? And he goes, haven't seen it yet. And I said, have you seen the first heavy metal movie? And he goes, I'm going to watch it tonight.
Damn.
And I said, so just to be clear, I said, dude, you know nothing about anime. You know nothing about animation. You don't know nothing about, you've never seen Wizards. You've never seen this. You've never seen this. You've never seen this. And so you're my executive. You're the executive. You're my point of contact for all things related to this movie. And I said, well, at this point I was getting kind of pissed. And I go, well, how did you get your job? And he goes, well, that's kind of personal. And I go, not really, because, and so long story short, so like we used to do this thing where this is back in the day when fax was king and all that stuff, and so we'd rework an element of the script or rework this. I was working with a writer at the time, and I would send them stuff on Monday because we worked on it all weekend, not slept a wink, and I'd send them stuff on Monday. Call them on Monday, call them on Tuesday, call them on Thursday, Wednesday, call them on Thursday, call them on Friday. Friday about 5:05, his assistant would fax something to my office in LA and then go, could you give us like what you're doing, see what you're going, could you give me a little more human condition, and could you up the violence a little bit more, up something a little bit more? And I went,
ramp it up by 5% is literally one of their go-to phrases, man. Ramp up the violence by 5%. Ramp up the 10%. Yeah, because I would
give us more
last time, so I'll try harder now. Fuck you.
And so I would so immediately it's like, I get this fax that's coming through, and I'd be like, what does this mean? What does it mean? What is it?
As you know, Kevin, I was on I lived in LA for 6 months one time when Rob Pryor and I were working on this Tattooer movie, right? And,
I like that.
And that movie is a terrible shame because it was literally a license to print money. So for anyone that's never heard of it, Tattooer is a movie about a guy that has tattoos all over his body, and he can pull them out and use them as weapons, right? And he goes on a mission of revenge, pulling these tattoos out. It's a license to print money, this movie. And I was very excited to live in LA. I was under contract to direct my first major feature film, and we had some producers on it, and it was unfathomable. These producers, like, I wanted to physically strangle every single one of these people, right? And the reason that this movie never got made and can never get made is because one producer decided to sue the other producer. And we found out about this because we were just sitting around like working on our stuff. And all of a sudden we received a phone call. And this is literally what the one producer said. Pick up the phone, and he goes, you'll never take this movie from you. I'll kill you. I'll have you killed. And then you go, hey man, how you doing? I haven't heard from you in a while, right? So this thing was so incredible. And I'm going to give you again a minute to think about this while I tell you my anecdote. Have you ever just lost it in a meeting? Have you ever just got to a point, Kevin, where you're sitting there and you realize that these people are awful and you can't take it anymore. Because I'm pretty patient, and I have this I have my favorite thing, and it goes back, I think it goes back, and this is a Tundra Publishing story, but we'll get into it. There was a time when we were sitting at Tundra and someone had got me to a point, and it was basically it was an attorney guy that was around us peripherally, and we were trying to work out what to do. And this guy had come in the Monday morning meeting and he'd taken it over, and we couldn't get past this person's ego, and it was killing us, right? Like, we just wanted to work. And so our good friend Mark Martin was trying to get out the door. He never wanted to be in the Monday morning meeting, so he's trying to walk out the door. And I was really frustrated. And at a certain point, I just snapped and I said, I'll tell you what. Why I'm leaving now, but why don't you stay here and have an argument with your ego? And when you finished arguing with your ego, come in my office and tell me who won, so I can tell that one to fuck off. It was my favorite moment, because everybody in that was sort of like, Paul, that's the best comeback I've ever heard, right? But I was so mad, and I just said, I'm not going to put on any pretense anymore. I've had it, I'm just going to tell you how it is. And I've done it a couple of times. I did it on the Tattooer movie with a couple of people. You just have to tell them at a certain point. Have you ever had one where you just went, that's it, I'm laying it all on the line?
Yeah, there's been a couple, and it's just been it's one of those things that you just like. There's a great line in Zoolander. Most awesome fucked up movie in the history of the world.
Zoolander. It's brilliant.
Will Ferrell's there, and he's Bambusho or whatever, and he's talking about Ben Stiller's True Blue, and he's working on a steel Magnum look, and he's doing it's like, it's the same look, it's the same look. Are you people taking crazy pills? What's wrong with you? So I've been in those moments, and it's like, I remember fairly recently I was developing this project, and it was this company, and they said, because it was always be like, you go into a pitch meeting and they go, and I've started these things with and this goes back to Fistful of Blood, which we worked on together and all this stuff. It'd be like, so the lead's female, and they go, let me stop you there. Female leads don't work. After Tomb Raider, after something, no more female leads. So you go, so our movie with a female lead doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, because 50% of the world's population is now disqualified. You got to be.
I said, so the pitch is dead. You died in the rain. You're in minute one, and they go, don't do movies with female leads. And you go,
yeah,
all right,
yeah.
But it's so we were in this meeting, and it was like, and we were developing a cartoon series, and this person that worked for this company, we hadn't even signed a contract. They hadn't taken an option on it yet. We were still discussing that, but they brought in their showrunner. They go, if we're going to take this project into a company like a Netflix or Amazon or whatever, we need you have to have a showrunner. And I go, why? They go, it makes people at these companies feel comfortable that there's a guy or a girl or a person that's run shows before, and this was an animated show. And I go, well, look, I did not intimately oversee every single aspect of 300 turtle animated cartoons, but we were really intimately involved in them.
Yep.
And I think that I think we got it covered. Why do we need a showrunner? It's like, no, and I've got the person that's going to be the perfect showrunner. And it was like the equivalent of like this guy directed season 3 of Muppet Babies or something. And I'm not saying it was Muppet Babies or it was something.
Yeah,
so this person worked on season 3 of this show, and this is the guy that's going to sell it for us. And I go, look, I don't come in here with an ego. I don't come in with anything, but I'm telling you that the co-creator of the Ninja Turtles doesn't need the guy that did season 3 of Muppet Babies to sell the show.
No.
it doesn't make sense. And she goes, well, they won't do it without you. And so finally I just go, you know what? Then we're not going to do the show, and left. And I go like, because it was just such a ludicrous thing that like this particular person had it. The only way the show was going to go forward if this person got the gig. And I'm like, well, we're not going to do that.
We don't do a lot of like naming names, but I really don't mind talking about there's one name I would mention, which is Mattel, right? It's not all Mattel, it's just kind of like interacting with Mattel at one point. I was on, I think they were on the Fox lot for a while, or the Warner lot, and I was sent over there by my agent to talk to them. So I go over there, and immediately they don't want to talk about my content, and what they wanted me to talk about was their content. Now, at the time, they had Peter Berg on a ship, and they were making Battleship, the movie, right? How'd that one work out for you? It was literally one of the it was a big shithole. But they had him making this $210 million movie out in the middle of the Atlantic, and they were running around, all because their theory was that Battleship is a branded thing, and therefore people will buy it. And my answer to that would have been, yes, it was branded in 1931, but I tend to think that people play video games now. So, you know, fuck off, right? I tended to get into this like little punky kind of like, you got to be kidding me. It was Hasbro. That's right, Derek. It was Hasbro. So it wasn't Mattel. Sorry, it was Hasbro. So I'm over with Hasbro, and so they sit with me and they say, so Paul, you know, we've followed your work for some time, and we're just thinking, you know, we think it would be kind of interesting to see what your pitches might be for, say, Jenga or Stretch Armstrong. Do you have any ideas maybe for Jenga? And in my mind, I'm thinking, actually, I do have an idea for Jenga. And there is no chance in a million years that I'm going to tell you what my idea for Jenga is in this movie. Like, that kind of fishing expedition is something that happens to people like you and I all the time, right? You go into these meetings and somebody is fishing for something. And so what they want to do is they throw out a little bit of bait. Hey, Kevin, you know, we're thinking, you know, we might like to work with you on something. You know, we might like to kind of maybe develop something together. Tell us all of your best ideas, Kev. And you're sitting there going, like, you know, like, you can't do it, man. But
people, no, because it's a good point, because it's a big worry, because you know we've done like you know, been in pitch meetings before, and it's like, you know, if it's getting to the point where they make you sign lots of NDAs and this kind of stuff, and it's like, and I don't remember, I think I was pitching. You might have even been there. I think we were pitching underwear somewhere, and underwear. We brought up like, this is the basic concept of underwear, and the person was like, wait, let me stop you right now, because we're developing Goosebumps, which is just like your project you're describing. You go like,
no,
it's not really.
Yeah. No,
and so.
I remember you and I sitting in Mattel. So now we can get back to Mattel. I remember you and I sitting in Mattel with underwear, which was a cool little, you know, thing. And then I remember Mattel people saying, "Oh, we have an idea just like that." And I remember you saying, "Would you care to show it to us?" So I think I've actually seen you be mildly grumpy. I remember you saying to them, "Would you like to show that to us?" And they all kind of looked around and were like, "We didn't expect that." You know, like, "No, well, you know, we can send it to you." And they're probably busy trying to work out how to draw it this week so they could send it to us, you know.
I think but it is a good point to bring up. I think that, you know, is in the experience of, you know, it's like what's been, you know, when something is developed as a comic book and published and been out there in the public, because you have on the one hand, you have people that will option a successful comic book because they've opted a successful comic book, and then they'll try to take it over and do what they will. There's ones that'll offer something. But if you've been established even in the smallest way, you know, it does give you a little bit of protection when you're going in for them fully ripping you off. You get something published out there, like I know in you know, concept, and there's a lot more detail to it. But you know, when Men in Black, which evolved out of a Malibu publication, which then was sold to another company, which was held back, and then suddenly became this major movie through a series of interesting instances. But that was not a very successful comic, and I think it was actually canceled at some point. But that was something that had sparked an interest with the right director and the right people to develop it. And that, and you've heard stories like one of my favorite movies, Romeo is Bleeding, which is a great film that floated around Hollywood for years and years and years before it was put out there. And
by the way,
it is.
Sorry, I was going to say, somebody right here asked us, what is this underwear that we keep talking about, right? So I'm actually I'm going to share just a couple of screenshots so people can actually see what underwear actually is. Here it is. This is an idea that a long time ago, Kevin had the original idea, and then I worked with him on this idea. And so it was a really cool project. These are some of the later ones, right, Kev? These are ones that were done after the fact, but there's still brilliant artwork. This is some of the,
yep.
And this was like a version of the main character. I always liked this image particularly. It's not very large, but I always liked it because it shows like the whole point. But underwear was like a little kid that would shrink down, and we actually published the book. He's a little kid.
It was definitely
in a world that you saw with your eyes, and then he would see his room, and it would look like a carpet and all that. And then when he went into underwear, it was like the carpet became a sea, and the table became a mountain. So the world would look completely different. So it was a really cute idea. And there you go. That's what underwear was. And
yes, it's funny because that's like,
yeah,
watching that project evolve, and that's actually a good example to follow. As an example, it's like underwear was originally developed. I had this idea in 1989, and it was an idea that was sort of based around the idea that when a child gets a toy, usually a boy, and that they play with that toy, they engage with that toy, that any environment, the whole play environment is the household. It's the stairs are a waterfall, the rug in the living room is a lake one day, it's an island the next day, and they have to accomplish that, or the whole floor is lava and it's something else, or the couch is this giant mountain and stuff. So I built this whole idea around a toy idea with a story that was sort of, again, if you could shrink yourself down to an action figure size, and then and your home would magically transform into this mysterious, wonderful world of kind of like Wizard of Oz, kind of like Calvin and Hobbes meets Wizard of Oz, a great imagination meets this fantasy world. And so I spent another couple of years developing it, and then this was around the time that Martin had moved up and was when we were putting together Tundra, and so I wanted to do something with Mark. So I sort of beat out this story and did the layouts, and then you're the series editor on that, but also at the same time you were contributing some wonderful ideas to the structure of the story, and so we ended up producing this book that came out in 1995. I originally published it at Kevin Eastman Studios, but that was for a number of different reasons. But what's interesting is that project was sold to Sony Wonder.
Yes.
In one pitch meeting, it was sold to Sony Wonder. It took 12 months to do the contract. After a year, we started working on the project, and that's when we went out a couple of times and met with Len Jansen. And I'm sorry, that was Sony Wonder. That was before. That was Becky Mancuso and a couple other Sony executives. So it was basically 2 years of underwear not doing anything. It never went forward with Sony Wonder. And then it transitioned to ABC Television, which was we first met Dan Didio and Jenny Strios and Len Jansen.
So let's do it, because I don't mind this. It's kind of funny, actually. Like it is a funny anecdote. Went to ABC Television, and what was interesting about it was that we went in, we pitched it, they signed it up in about 5 seconds, and then that stuff kind of messed around for a long time. And after a while, they put a young executive on it who basically did nothing with it for a really long time. And it was really quite funny because that young executive's name was Dan DiDio, and he ended up becoming the publisher at DC Comics. So years later, Dan and I met, and he wanted me to come and work for him at do some work at DC. And I said, hey, Dan, actually, I already know you. And he said, well, how do we know each other? And I said, do you remember the TV show Underwear? And all the blood drained from Dan's face at that point. And he realized, like, oh, yeah, that was a bit of a mess, wasn't it? So it...
yeah, it was never, and we found out later pretty much that Underwear was never really intended to move forward at ABC. And that was sort of like something that they squashed. But, my favorite part is, so ABC was then, after about 2 years of us not going forward with ABC, it was acquired by Disney. And then I had met another guy through a guy named Sandra Schwartz, who had taken over Columbia TriStar Television and had been doing stuff like Men in Black TV animated series, Rusty and the Big Boy, and a number of other things. Jumanji, I think, maybe. And he loved Underwear, and so we brought it over there. He optioned it, and we were there for 2 years. And then when that division of Columbia TriStar faded, he ended up going over to Warner Brothers Animation, optioned it there, and floated around there for another couple of years, did nothing. It was optioned at least 2 other times. But I'm just thinking, like, if you look at the timeline, that it came out in '95, so over the next 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 years, it just never went forward. There was interest in it, but it just never was able to find that right connection to move forward. And I still think that Underwear can be and is going to be something awesome in the future. But but it's one of those. You've heard about projects that have floated around Hollywood for years, decades. It took 10 years to make this.
Underwear is something that floated around, and you and I have tried. We've had Nickelodeon come back to us on that. I worked on that for a little while with you. We tried to get Nickelodeon loved it. It's a great idea. It just it got messed around for a while.
It's like you think like would the Turtles really have a shot these days? If you think about it, or anything that worked. I think it really I think we touched on this in one of the previous discussions. It was just sort of comes down to the point, and it's really a kind of a quite magical moment at the right place, at the right time and the right opportunity. Sort of connecting with enough of the like minds and pulling together, right elements to make a project work. Which is, for the longest time, one of my favorite parts of when the DVD market was really booming was the behind the scenes. Like, they would just put out these epic, director commentaries, director actor commentaries, director producer actor behind the scenes footage. And I mean, even you could take the, I loved it. Like, when you hear the behind the scenes for John Carpenter's The Thing, or listen to like Kurt Russell and John Carpenter, in my impression, quite obviously smoking weed while they're talking about Big Trouble in Little China and the director's commentary. Or, this goes to directly back to, say, the 30th anniversary of the Turtles' first movie, which is this year, is that, we've repeatedly gone back to New Line Cinema, which is now Warner Brothers, and part of Warner Brothers, and said, we know there's, Steve Barron, the director, has acknowledged that there is a director's work print that is different from, the original movie. There's a work print that shows alternate scenes that have never been seen. So it's not color corrected, it's not perfectly edited, but it is a work print of the version of the movie that's never been seen before. That there's they've never done a director's commentary. They've never done any behind the scenes for anything for that. Nothing else. So the first Turtle movie, it seems like one of those ones that you want to celebrate a little bit, and do a little bit of, so the Criterion version of behind the scenes for a project. But because it was
I was going to say that Steve Niles, I remember him telling me a story about how 30 Days of Night was being made. And when it was being made, they were on video. They kind of were videotaping a behind the scenes, like, board meeting amongst the producers. And so they're talking about how the story's going, and they're talking about how it's being made. And at one point, one of the producers says, you know what we should do? Should we just set fire to the town at the end? And in the video, apparently, according to Niles, you can see everybody in the room look at this guy like, what are you talking about? And that's literally what made it into the movie. So,
and it made it into the movie.
That's what they were doing. And so a friend of mine on here, Dan Boutros, says he was in an entertainment company. I saw motivations behind what gets signed. A percentage of the time, it's genuinely good stuff. But another part of it is all about relationships. So in other words, it's the friendships that you have, the casting couch. I kid you not, it's real, folks. Like all of these things that should have no bearing on whether or not we make a movie or a comic or we get something signed. What should be the requisite, Kevin? Should it not be it's the best material, it's the best creators making the best stuff that speaks to the most people because it's really cool? That almost, in my opinion, is one of the last considerations of why something gets made or why even you do a project, right?
Well, I think it's, what's unfortunate is like, and again, this is a philosophy based on an outsider looking in, based on limited experiences in the town. But it's like at the same time, I spent considerable amount of time there watching some pretty crazy things that don't, they're so crazy people would never believe that they're actually true, whether it be from producer situations to setup to staging to feuds between people to actors acting. But it seemed like to me that if you were on two levels in the filmmaking industry, which was, you look at examples like Robert Rodriguez with El Mariachi, and he does a wonderful book, and I always tell, and we might have mentioned this before, if you ever wanted to read a great sort of get your head around the movie industry just in the smallest and the quickest sense, is read Rebel Without a Crew, a book he wrote about making El Mariachi, because it was, he literally went through a month of medical experiments to raise the money to do the movie, and then Carlos Gallardo, who used every resource, including family and friends, and shooting in Mexico, and they would borrow it. They'd have a camera that they would get to use for a day. They would shoot as many scenes as they could, and they had to take it back to the school library at night, or that kind of stuff. To indie independent movies, do the Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, to so many guys and so many up and coming directors that the only way to get something done is wholly independent, wholly self-funded, max every credit card. Clerks, Kevin Smith maxed every credit card. I mean, it goes, like I said, we borrowed money from our uncle for the first turtle. But you have level at full creative control, and you make best possible, purest form of idea at that level. And then you go into Hollywood, and then it becomes, because you're a success, and now a lot of people have to get their hands into that success and feel that they have to have say to make you more successful, and understand the Hollywood system. So you have that level of success, and then you get sort of mucked up in the middle, and then if you stay true and you're able to reach a level of success where you can then take that complete control, then that's a whole other level of success where you can actually make films that are important and say what you really want them to say and have the say that you want them to be. And it's this so that whole middle ground. It's funny you mentioned that. I was thinking about this earlier because it's so true. You're talking about golf. So you're a very talented golfer. I know that. I played with you before. I think on my wedding day, and but no, that
wedding day we played golf.
Yes. Yeah, we played golf, but it was but I noticed when I started playing golf, and it goes to what you brought up before. And when I first started playing, I just went and drove a bucket of balls, and if you just went like, okay, and you get it, and you sort of don't know what you're doing right or wrong, but you sort of like, well, that hit good, maybe. And so, and you're not good in any sense, but you're not bad either. And then so I felt like, well, this is a lot easier than I ever thought. I'm going to take some lessons, and I'm going to get really good. So then I took lessons, and for the next 3 years, I completely sucked at golf because you couldn't think about anything but everything, but hold it right, do that right, try that right. And then I remember playing up at Beaverbrook once. That great Jay Leno story, which is
Yes.
playing up at Beaverbrook once, and I was watching these senior citizens play, and they were just like having the best time ever.
Yep.
Hero was all stressed out, and they were just like, if you get the club swing right, and you just enjoy the moment of the swing, and it would go 100 yards down the fairway straight, and you were like, yay! And I'll just get, I'm not trying to get it on in 1 or 2 or 3.
That's right. Just relax and enjoy. Play to what you can do. It's
Yeah, and that was so. I think that's the evolution of that applies to the golf aspect. It certainly applies to the comic book business because I've gone from self-publishing through what I've gone through back to self-publishing, and it's been the greatest joy of my life. To the same with movie making, and I think that's what's cool about I guess this segment is I think you're in the same boat as you're at a level where you're now going back into comic books at a way that is comfortable for you, but you're actively pursuing filmmaking in a way that is something you can control.
Absolutely, something I can control. That's what METAStudios is all about. Like we control the product because we make it, right? I have we'll do sort of like a minute or so aside. I actually have an interesting anecdote. So I brought up on screen a question from someone. This actually fits to what you and I are talking about. So I'll probably do a minute on this anecdote, right? The question is, how was All Winners Squad supposed to end? So let me tell you guys what All Winners Squad was. And in fact, I'll share the screen and I'll show you guys what this project was. It was basically a Marvel project that I did with Carmen de San Domenico, and he's a brilliant artist. And here's the layouts, right? It's beautiful, and it was a World War II story. And what we did is we took all of the forgotten heroes. You remember, like crazy ones, like the Young Avenger, people that we haven't seen since Timely comics from like 1931, And what we said was the premise was that they were all propaganda pamphlets and that these people were real. And the reason they went out of print is because most of them died in service of their country. So it's a really sad story. But this is probably an infuriating story, and it's worth bringing up, right? Because given the darkness of our conversation this week. So this thing was beautiful, and it was an 8-issue series, and I finished writing it, and it is the only series I've ever done that was canceled in the middle, and they stopped publishing it. And the question that was asked was why did it get canceled? Here's the real story behind why that book got canceled. It got canceled because, in my opinion, Marvel got cold feet because it was about homosexuality. And at times, it can be infuriating to work with a company who at some point, because of corporate pressure, then says, we don't feel comfortable with the way that this story is playing out, right? Now, Marvel will always say, oh, well, the sales weren't good. But of course they will, right? The fact is, you'd already published 5 issues. You might as well publish the last 3, make a trade paperback of it, and sell that trade paperback for as many years as you want to. It doesn't make sense financially to cancel it right near the end of the series. But what happened was we had a moment where 2 characters, are homosexual and it's not allowed in the military in 1940s. And so one of the characters walks around the corner and he sees the 2 men kissing. And when I got the artwork back, they didn't show the 2 men kissing. They showed a shadow of them on the wall kissing. And I was furious because I said, if this was Batman and Wonder Woman, you guys would have published that in a second. If this was, Captain America and Black Widow, you guys would have put that on the front cover, but because it's 2 men, you couldn't even put it on the last page, right? It was the story itself, and I know that someone is asking, how does it end? Well, I'll tell you how it ends. It ends where this character, Captain Flame, is supposed to be there at the ignition of the atomic bomb, and instead of absorbing the blast as he can with his power, he basically turns his power off and commits suicide. So there were some moments in that story that were uncomfortable for them. but I don't give a rat's ass. It was always in the pitch, you know, it was always going to be this way. And it was a really poignant story about like war. It was always a really poignant story about like love and dedication to your brothers and how you get a certain love for people when you go to war and all that kind of stuff. And two of the characters happened to be homosexuals, right? But that wasn't, who cares, right? That was kind of part of what was going on in the story. And it drove me crazy that they canceled that book, because I put up such a stink that they made that page, and they said, like, I can't, you know, I said, I can't believe that you in this day and age would basically censor a page and not show two men kissing. It was always in the proposal. It was always the way that the story was supposed to go. And you guys turn around and drew some shadows on a wall. You would never do that for a man and a woman kissing. So why did you stop it? And right after that, they canceled it. And so the answer to your question, Fox 4, sorry, I didn't quite get your name over there, but A Fox 739. The answer to your question, why did, you know, what happened to it, is Marvel got cold feet, in my opinion. And I think that's really disappointing, right? You know, we're making great, you know, go ahead.
No, we're making great, you know, strides with that kind of stuff. I mean, you know, even like, you know, I mean, that sounds like such a stupid statement when I even say it. It's like, you know, it's like finally, you know, things have changed for the better. The realization has changed for the better. The understanding of that has changed for the better in every possible sense. Even though there is still, you know, people that have issues with it, but it's sort of like, it's one of those things that it doesn't, you know, my mindset and my appreciation for, you know, love and understanding and love the person you're supposed to be in love with, period. That's the beginning, middle, and end. But it just makes me think too that, you know, there are difficulties with, you know, like we talked about it in one of the early sessions about Swamp Thing '88, which was, you know, that same thing, that the story had been written. The idea of, you know, Swamp Thing becoming part of Christ's Cross was spelled out from the very beginning, but it got to be cold feet, and but we, you know, even, you know, and I think like we had some very serious conversations when we first were talking turtles back in the days. We were in one of the panels, and it was just one of those, you know, we had the turtles, one of the turtles asking for a beer in April's apartment, or there were just certain instances where, you know, some of the people that were in charge, they didn't want to have an instance where, you know, one misleadingness would bring down a whole franchise, so they put a lot of money into, and it's just sort of, you know, that's you know, it's been an unfortunate part of our industry, not only in comics and music, and also, you know, movies and things. You think of how many, you know, people loved Freddie Mercury until they found out he was homosexual, or you know, or loved Elton John until they, you know, he was able to come out. You know, so there's always these things that we're
Wait, Freddie Mercury was homosexual? Spoilers, man.
No, but you know, but I guess it's but it's one of those things that, you know, we're in a very interesting time, I think, in our lives, and certainly in my life, where, you know, I still have you know, parents that were very old fashioned and very strict in the way they brought things up, and their understanding of the world, of what was right and what was wrong, and what they instilled in me. And, you know, and I feel like some of the stuff that I was taught when I was younger, that then as I grew older and understood, you know, the real way of the world, and what was important, and what was important as human beings, and how we should, you know, really love and embrace and respect each other, and grow together, and make, you know, feeling that compassion.
Let me do this. Let me address this comment that Miss Sai makes, because the comment is, I'm not really digging all the LGBTQ agenda that infiltrates cartoons. And here's what I would say about that. If it's an agenda where we're trying to force these ideas into a story, and you and I talked about this before, like if Iron Man is suddenly forced in as a young African-American girl, and the Hulk becomes a young Asian guy, and this guy, Wolverine becomes gay. I'm like, I agree with you, right? Like, these characters were never that. So why are we trying to force feed them backwards? Why are we reverse engineering them? Why don't you just make brand new characters that do that? But the difference that I would make in what we did with Band of Heroes, and what we did with All Winner Squad, was that was always in the story, and it wasn't reverse engineering. It wasn't kind of putting homosexuality in for some kind of agenda. It was that as a historical matter, homosexuals were not allowed in the army in the 40s. In fact, the entire story was about a guy called Alan Turing, as someone that's a big hero of mine. If not for Alan Turing, we would all be speaking German. Okay, this guy was a brilliant mathematician. They eventually made a movie about him. He was a homosexual. He was not allowed to be a homosexual, and they had prosecuted him for being such. And then he ended up decoding the Enigma code and helping, the Allies win the war. And the moment that the war was over, they prosecuted him for being a homosexual again. So
that was
what have you done for me lately, right? And so All Winner Squad was when I heard about what had happened to Alan Turing, I couldn't believe it, and I wrote All Winner Squad because I felt that it was crazy. So there's
they did a great movie in that with
with Benedict
Cumberbatch. Yeah, and no, so it's even. Okay.
Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking it's sort of one of those things that like Mel Gibson did a really good movie called Hacksaw Ridge, and I forget about one of the first real guys that did not want. He wanted to represent and fight for his country, but he would not carry a gun to do that, and then ends up saving 75 people in this awful specific. And it's sort of like it's those kind of stories that when you can bring that story to light and understand the conviction to the certain human condition elements and things that are important for people that will stand the ground and those things. An important statement that makes a change, whether it's Rosa Parks or just so many others that have just done the right thing. It's just
entertainment
stories need to be told.
Yeah, entertainment has the opportunity to tell analogs and to tell stories about things that we wouldn't normally tell, right? So I think that Alan, that All Winner Squad came out before the movie about Alan Turing. And I've always known about Alan Turing, and I've always thought that the guy was an incredible hero. And it was amazing to me that a guy who basically helped win the war for the Allies was after they didn't need him again, they prosecuted him again. And they led him to suicide, basically. They killed the guy, and they had him chemically castrated, apparently. So it's a sad story. And I felt like that we need to kind of look at it's just a story, right? It's not an agenda. It's really interesting to look at what homosexuality in the Second World War meant to a lot of people, right? It was just a good story. Forget anything else, just a good story. And so it was disappointing that Marvel would basically can it because they were getting uncomfortable that it was leading in a certain way. And I want to, just to get that anecdote fully finished, when I first worked for Marvel, I wrote a story about Rogue, and it happened to have a swastika in it. And it was about how Rogue absorbs the memories of a survivor of Auschwitz so that she won't forget what happened, right? And it's a tremendously heroic thing that she does. She relives the life of somebody in Auschwitz so that she won't forget what happened in Auschwitz, right? And Marvel canned it because it had a swastika in it. And I said, I think you're kind of missing the point. The whole point of the story is if we sweep these things under the rug, then we're destined to forget them. And so we'll repeat them, right? And they swept it under the rug. That story about not sweeping things under the rug was swept under the rug. And so it can be very frustrating as creators, right? When we're trying to do something and we are struggling to fight a system, like we want to say great things as creators. The Turtles had a great forum. They're a gigantic franchise. And so you guys had the opportunity to tell brilliant stories in all of this. But when you think about it, at a certain point on a corporate level, the corporations are going to go, no, thanks, Kevin. I know you created it, but I don't want to do that anymore. I don't feel comfortable with my franchise. So you could always do it in the comics, but you could never really do it. You could do it in your comics, but you could never really do it with the franchise at times, So
Well, that's like, and let me to put it in perspective in that, that under this point I'm going to make in a second is like the turtles are not even in the same universe. Only in that I remember when Mouse first came out.
Yeah.
It was just one of those things that it was just the most revolutionary graphic novel of the horrors of Auschwitz and these mice characters and the Nazis were portrayed as rats, and it was just told this story that was based on stories that his art's parents suffered as survivors of the Holocaust, and they would say, "Well, this is an amazing graphic novel," and people would look at it outside the comics community and look at it and say, "Well, that's not a graphic novel. It's just but it's an important work of literature." And even Spiegelman was like very much like, it is a graphic novel. I chose to tell it as a linear words and picture story as a graphic novel because that was the way that I wanted to portray to get past this incredibly difficult subject in a way that reaches a deeper understanding based on my personal experiences told to me by my parents, my grandparents. And so it's just one of those things. It's a story that like Senator John Lewis's did a book called March that IDW put out in a couple of volumes that was just fantastic of what he went through in the civil rights movement. And I think that we're lucky that it's stories like that just need to be told, and whatever the format to get the word is in a way out in its purest form and the most intelligent form for all of us. We're lucky to have comics as a medium, and even these days we're lucky, going back to the spirit of independence with, say, film making, things like Kickstarter and Indiegogo and things, Kickstarter, you can have the opportunity with the right series of connectors and support. You can tell a truly independent story that is beholden to and only to you, and how you want to represent it and how you want to tell it. And that's the purest form.
Right. Comics are such a perfect medium to tell any story in, because they're super cheap.
I agree.
It's black lines on white paper with some coloring, and not even on paper half the time, right? So we have a luxury, even though it's a very difficult medium to tell a story in, because novelists have a hard time with comics, and screenwriters have a hard time with comics. It's a hard medium to write in, right? I found writing novels and screenplays much easier than writing comics. It's very difficult. So
just to keep on point, just as funny because I was, and I don't want to use funny in the wrong sense, is that the opportunity to have a film like Jojo Rabbit come out,
yes,
last year, and accomplish what it did in the way that it did, and the understanding that it did, it was just brilliant in every sense of the word. So, this is it's definitely is a subject we could probably talk on for many more hours, but I'm actually getting a.
Well, we have to. Yeah, I was going to say we have to wrap up. We're 2 hours in, and this didn't go the way as it normally doesn't. It didn't go the way that we intended. For those of us who don't know, Kevin and I often get into conversations and it goes sideways. So we went a little bit sideways tonight. Thanks very much. What I would say is thank you so much for everybody to come in and joining in. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, then please subscribe. One quick thing I want to mention, obviously, which is please go down to Kevin's website, which I am throwing in on the banner right now. There you go. I should have done it ages ago. Go find some stuff at KevinEastmanStudios.com, because that's the really cool stuff going on. Come visit us at our Facebook pages. Come visit us on Twitter, Kevin and I. And we have fun doing this. We do this every Wednesday. We actually do this every Wednesday. I know that my friend Dan over here is asking, can we do it regularly? We will do it regularly because we do it regularly. Kevin, you and I can't do next week, I think, or the next couple of weeks, because we have some prior commitments. But what I will say is this. When we come back, we are going to tell, over a two-parter, the story of Tundra Publishing, and it's the story that basically has never been told, and it is the true story behind it. So, Kevin, thanks so much for coming on again, mate. I always have the best time hanging with you. And now we got some of this off our chest, right?
Until next time.
That's right. Until next time. And we'll see you all later. Thank you so much, everybody. And bye-bye for now.